Welcome back to another episode of the Capes and Tights podcast right here on capesandtights.com. I'm your host, Justin Soderberg. This episode, we welcome the return of David M. Booher and the first-time guest, Chris Shehan, to the podcast to talk their book, Specs, over at Boom Studios. The 4-issue miniseries hits trade paperback today when this episode drops, August 16th at local comic book stores or August 22nd at bookstores everywhere. But David is known for books like Canto, Dungeons and Dragons, Killer Queens and Killer Queens 2, All New Firefly, Specs, and the Eisner-nominated Rain. Also, Killer Queens' Eisner-nominated as well. But Chris Shehan is known for House of Slaughter, the Autumnal with our friend Daniel Kraus, Specs as well, Prometheus, She Said Destroy was a cover on there, as well as Nightfall Double Feature. So check out this episode of the Capes and Tights podcast. But before you do, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff, and subscribe, rate, review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Please leave 5 stars, and please tell your friends, family, and everybody at capesandtights.com. This is David M. Booher and Chris Shehan of Specs, the trade paperback dropping August 16th at local comic book shops everywhere from Boom Studios. Enjoy, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. How are you two doing?
Good.
Great.
Awesome. It's always interesting. I thought about it after I said that. How are you two doing? That when there's multiple guests on there, there's always like this dead silence after people like, "How are you?" And you're like, "Who's gonna go? Who's gonna talk?"
we're perfectly in sync. So
Yeah.
we know.
You know,
Actually,
people are
it's a great pleasure to be to do this podcast because Chris and I rarely get to be in the same room together, virtual or otherwise. So it is great to be able to come together for a show like this.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for being here. We appreciate you having here. I always talk in the plural too. The we. It's me. There's not a group of there's no producer here doing stuff. It's me. So we is a group of people. I make myself look bigger by saying we.
Your 2-year-old son is in the back off screen with the boom mic.
Mike. He's got the flashcards. He's got the cards, the note cards saying what to talk about next. Yeah, the cue cards. But
the crew here in the studio.
I just like talk to fake people. Hey, yeah, well,
there's like a venti Starbucks coffee that's the size of his head.
I'm like, I'll take hey Jim, I'll take a coffee when you go for a run. We have an assistant too.
There's a little jazz band over there that plays the outro.
Your son is awesome. He does so much.
Everything. He does everything. He has no idea. I talked about the idea about doing a podcast with him when he gets older, to do like reviewing movies with him, but like from like a perspective of like a 7-year-old, and then as he gets older, like do movies and see how his reviews potentially, maybe he'll become a professional movie critic by doing that.
I want to hear 7-year-olds take on like Inception.
Yes.
Yeah.
The movie theater had great popcorn. That's what the review would be.
Christopher Nolan by way of 7-year-old kid.
Yes. But we're not here to talk about my son either. My son is great, but we're not here to talk about him. We're here to talk about comics and specs and the great world of the world we love the most right now is the world of comics. Obviously, David, you've been on before, and so if anybody, this is my little ploy to get someone to go listen to another episode. If you want to learn more about David's personal story of how he came into comic books, go listen to that episode. But Chris has not been on before, so let's do a little bit of a slight, quick origin story, Chris, on how you got into the world of comic books.
Okay. I didn't grow up reading comics. A lot of people did, and I feel like that's a little bit different. But I grew up loving movies and books and animation, and all of that made me want to be a storyteller. And it wasn't after a lot of like exploration when I was older, like 17 to 19, I was experimenting with filmmaking and animation and all of these different ways. Like I was creative writing, I was doing everything I could think of. And for some reason, comics didn't quite hit me until I started discovering artists that I really liked. And it turned out they were comic artists. So I was like, oh, the comics aren't what I thought they were. So I in college, um, I took one of my basics classes was literature, but they let you pick, and so there was like a Western literature and like folklore, but one of the literature classes that was comic books, graphic novels. And I was like, oh, this will be easy. It's just, I thought it'd be fun and easy. And then, but they introduced us to a lot of like really great books just to kind of show us what comic books have the ability to be. And one of them was Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, and that's like my Bible. And then there was, stuff like Watchmen and Identity Crisis and like some just real like narrative heavy comic books, and it kind of like opened my mind. And from then I really wanted to make comics because I wanted to tell stories anyway, and I was already getting into drawing. And so I I went to my first Comic Con when I was 19, and I made a portfolio and I brought it. It was terrible, and I was very severely rejected. But I did have some Artist Alley artists giving me some great feedback. And so my goal was take all the feedback of everything I got, write it all down, and then work on those specific things for a year, and then come back to Comic Con with a new portfolio. So I did. At 20, I went back to San Diego Comic Con with a new portfolio. It still wasn't good, but it was better. And I noticed that they gave me less feedback, less things to work on, less criticism. And so I just kept doing that. And I started making my own comics for fun and putting them on the internet. And then that led me to getting my first paid comic book work. I drew one issue of a historical Western comic that you could buy in like a local museum now in my hometown. And it was about like a 1800s cowboy guy that like an 1800s marshal. And the pay, I wasn't paid a lot, but it was my first published comic book. It was my first paid work, and that was really exciting. And I think I was 21 at that point, so I just kept going. And I started working with writers on Kickstarter projects. So like some of my first works are a book called Prometheus I did with Ryan Little, who's a writer on I Am Groot and Marvel's What If on Disney Plus. And I from there I started reading a lot of comics too, and a lot of the comics I was reading were by companies like Vault and Boom and IDW. I really liked stuff that was kind of outside of superhero big two stuff. And I it was fan art. I did fan art of an upcoming Vault book, which led me to they published the fan art as a cover, and that was for She Said Destroy. And from there I started doing covers, and then they reached out to me to do a book, and that was the Autumnal, and I've been in sort of mainstream comics since then. So it's been kind of a 10 plus year journey for me.
That's awesome. Yeah, exactly. The best thing about that story is the teaching moment of just work hard and listen to people. Don't take rejection and just be like, okay, I can't do this anymore. But like you got the rejection, you worked with that, and then now you're obviously working with creative people like David, and other people like that.
and so I didn't.
Yeah. What were we gonna say, Chris?
Oh, I was gonna say there's no such thing as like this isn't for me. Like you're always gonna suck at something when you start. So I've always known that, and I just kept going. Like I was new to drawing and I was new to comics, and I wanted to do it, so I just kept going. And not being good at it doesn't mean it's not for you or that it's not meant to be. It's a skill. Anything you can learn, anything that you want to learn. And I chose this, so I kind of just dove all in and spent years making it work. I'm still learning.
I can't I can't, it's uncanny to me how similar our origin stories are, because
Yeah.
I didn't grow up reading comics either, and I started about 15 years ago writing, and
Hmm.
the first things I wrote were just terrible. But then I kept at it, and each thing was a little bit less terrible than the last
Mhm.
thing, until it got to the point where it actually started to be better and good. And it was about probably just going to San Diego Comic Con is what got me into comics and writing comics, and it's probably been a little over 10 years, maybe 12 years that I've been doing this, to have our paths converge into specs,
Yes.
Yeah.
believe it or not, which is wild. That's wild.
Well, I
Yeah. We
mean,
probably crossed paths before.
yeah,
100%.
probably. Well, there's so little number of people that go to San Diego Comic Con. You guys, I'm surprised
Yeah.
you guys didn't run into each other.
Yeah.
We might have met at some point along the way, but we probably, neither one of us was probably in the place to collaborate on something
Oh no,
to,
we were.
at the level that we
Yes.
wanted to operate
Yeah.
at, which,
I
you
mean,
know,
how did that come about?
aspirational.
How did the collaboration between the two of you come about with Specs?
I think it was House of Slaughter, right?
Yeah.
You were working
I
on
was
House of
work.
Slaughter.
I was working on that, and it's in a lot of the same vein as Spec. So David already had the story and reached out to me with it, and I was doing something that was kind of had that vibe in a way, a character story about youth and queerness, and
Mhm.
so I was just like, oh yeah, it's perfect. Um, but I feel like you actually reached out to me when I was barely starting House of Slaughter, because I felt like it was like a year in the making before I even started drawing Specs.
Oh yeah. So Specs had this interesting life, and it's at the end of it, it's just a lesson in believing in your work and believing in your
Hmm.
story, and not letting anybody get in the way. Because the story concept originally started out as a single, it's like a short, and that was going to be in an anthology. And I think it was like 20 pages, so it was kind of a long short. It's like a one shot basically, and it was far less. It was more of coming of age and less horror, sort of spooky, eerie.
Hmm.
Uh, and something happens. Chris, I think you were still, maybe it wasn't you, maybe it was a different artist, but something happened with that anthology, and I had to pull the story out, and that was the right thing to do. And then it got set up with a publisher that it was going to be 3 issues. And Chris, I think that was the point when you got it, that when we collaborated on it, because I thought you
Hmm.
would be a fantastic fit for this. And then something happened there, and we pulled that out of there for good reasons that we won't get into. But we believed in the story, and we believed that that was the right fit, and we didn't have a place for it.
Yeah, I
And
was
then I
committed to doing it, however, so I was just waiting till it was
and
time.
Chris was working with Boom on House of Slaughter. I was working with Boom on All New Firefly,
Mhm.
and so they're familiar with us separately. So we said, well, how about you getting to know us together? And we pitched Specs, and it sort of evolved into this 4 issue supernatural horror series with the queer character driven, like, core and heart to it, that we eventually published.
Mhm.
So it was just believing in the story and pushing it as far forward as we could get until we got it on paper, out in the world.
You mentioned 4 issues, and I talked to you this prior to recording too. About my only complaint is the fact that it is only 4 issues. I want more. I wish there was more. I guess that's the thing to say about any comic book that someone is a fan of. We all want more of it, but like it's one of those things that's it's so hard to like put a finger on it nowadays. It's like there's no real hard fast rule of miniseries. Like it could literally, I think Cullen Bunn just put out a 3 issue miniseries. I think it might have been over at Vault, but it was a double size issue, so it was more of a 6 issue. So, but like it's like doesn't make any sense anymore. It could be 3, could be 5, could be 6, could be 4. How did it end up with 4 issues at Boom?
uh, Economics. So the tale of single issue comics is, it's I like to say it's a parabola curve,
Mhm.
but a parabolic curve, but in reality it's kind of like issue one, and then oftentimes it's like a cliff. So you do 4 issues, and you stand a better chance of sustaining sales through 4 as opposed to 5, and then 6. 6 is like, it's so hard to get a 6-issue series out there because the tail is so short on single issues. So, but 4 issues was fine for us because it made us tell a story. I don't know if you feel this way, Chris, but it made me tell a story that was there. Nothing could be wasted. It had to be so tight, the storytelling, that you didn't have time to go off and do other things. You just had to have that tight story being told in that limited space, which I think we did.
Yeah, it worked out. I liked how I feel like 5 issues would have been perfect at least, but that's just me wanting more time with them, the characters.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny. I always have these conversations with people about 4 issues versus 5 issues and so on and so forth. I believe the artist is typically the one that always wants the 5th issue. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things like, maybe you get, you're involved with these characters and you're actually physically drawing lines with these characters that maybe you just want to continue doing it. And this is not me saying that 4 issues wasn't enough. It definitely was paced out well, and it was told. The whole story was told. I just think it's one of those things that, like, if I can get, there's certain books that keep on going on and on and on that I'm like lukewarm on, and then there's books that are like really good and I really like, and they're 4-issue miniseries, and I'm like, oh my god, I want this more.
Yeah.
Well, and there's with more space too, there's chances to let the art breathe and the story breathe a little bit, so we can do more full pages to make like the emotional impact and do some cool things like spreads and that sort of thing that normally with 4 issues you just got to be so economical. So 5 issues would have been great, but also it forced me as laying out the story to be like, this, we need to get 4 issues, 5-issue series. It would have looked different. It would have been paced differently than a 4-issue series. So it was a fun challenge, and I'm glad we got to the end with it. And I certainly hope that there is more 4, 5, 6 ongoing, I don't know, in this world, because I want to do more.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like, obviously not spoiling anything, but like the end of the comic book it's not a definitive ending, so you don't have to worry about it. It could go further. It could have offshoots. It could have, the glasses the glasses aren't this only time, so you could have different places in times for this comic book. For sure. This one takes place in 1987 from the majority of it. Was there a reasoning why it was take place in the 80s?
Because I love the 80s. I mean, true, I grew up. Kenny and Ted are a little bit older than I was in 1987. I was 8 in 1987. But I was an 80s kid. So I definitely wanted to set it back then, but also it served a very important story purpose, which is you got 2 kids who are outsiders in a small town in 1987, where it's I'd like to say we're now enlightened, but we are. Chris probably has some stuff to say about this, but we're still struggling with these same issues, but it was very different in 1987 without social media, without the connection around that kids have nowadays. So to be 17 in 1987 and in the closet, or the only black kid in your small white town, it's a different struggle. And that's what the glasses are, that's what happened. The glasses came in and they magnified the problems that these kids have, and then they had to deal with it. So it was personal and story driven to set it back then.
Yeah, I think that, and then like just in general, any sort of like mystery or horror story tends to work better in an era before cell phones and the internet, because it allows the characters to go places, to go to the library and use a payphone and go to the stuff like that. I like it allows me to visually give you something more interesting.
The payphone. That's where my brain went exactly. You got to draw a phone booth.
Yeah, that was fun.
I always talk to people about like TV shows like Seinfeld or X-Files, where like half those shows wouldn't exist. Like the seasons would have been three seasons long, because half the problems they dealt with was the fact that there wasn't technology to, like, going to the wrong movie theater because you couldn't get a hold of something because they didn't have a cell phone, or like X-Files, like traveling halfway across the world to figure out something. They could have just looked up the internet or called someone or texted someone and figured that stuff out. And putting ourselves back in a situation where there was less social media, internet, stuff like that, it just adds to the story. Plus, I mean, the coupon or the page in the comic to get the gamma ray the magic specs, you would have had to mail it out technically. Obviously, things are the way they are in the comic book, but like the idea wasn't like you went to a website and typed in a coupon code and something got mailed to you. Like, you physically would have had to cut something out or look at something or so on and so forth. In that. Speaking of the specs, obviously the word specs is the name of the comic book, but like, was there many iterations of what the specs would look like prior to like what you guys landed on? Obviously,
I don't
Chris
think so.
It was just that.
Chris.
Yeah, I started drawing. I started drawing my own glasses because I just thought that would be easier. And then I got a note that they should be more along the lines of those Ray-Ban style, like boxier lenses. So I actually bought some online, so that so that I could wear them and take pictures of them and light them the way that I do, so that I can use them throughout the book as a reference.
I still think those should be like regularly available, David. Like I don't like.
So
I wanted to do this entire episode with those on.
I forget. Are we doing audio or video?
It's both.
Is it both?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm holding up a backer card with actual pair of specs that I was able to source that looks almost exactly like the red magic specs that Chris had designed.
Yeah.
And then the background's art on it is the advertisement. It's Chris actually designed this background card too.
So that's that's a photo of the glasses I bought. I
is it really?
Photoshopped it, and then that's a picture of my mom from the 70s that I put the glasses on her, and I painted her so that it would look like an old advertising illustration.
That is absolutely wonderful.
That is wonderful. I didn't know that. That's so glad. But yeah, so I don't know if I had envisioned the red glasses, but I think it's just always been in my mind that they were these red glasses that, because the X-ray specs, the traditional X-ray specs have like the spirals in the lenses. So I wanted it to be something a little bit different than that, but obviously very reminiscent of those 1960s novelty advertisements in the back of comic books. And I actually have a book that I think, Chris, I might have even sent you photos of what's inside. It was a artist, I forget the name, but like a graphic designer who created an entire book full of imaginary ads for novelties from the back of old comic books.
That's cool.
They don't exist. They don't. Geez, I don't want to walk off screen, but I think it's like right over here. But they don't exist. These products don't exist. But it's just he has such a clear sense of what this design aesthetic is. So it's just page after page of the coolest things that never were, and that's exactly the vibe that I wanted, and that's exactly the vibe that Chris ended up doing.
Yeah,
with these
I made some ads, some different ads that you can see throughout the book, but I made them full page so that I think they might publish them in the trade as full page ads.
I hope so.
But I sent them the files. But yeah, I did these like painted illustrations like you'd see in a Glamour magazine ad, and then the more comic book one with the gamma ray. I did all of that separately so that I could just insert it into the page, because I was getting really into like painting these ads that looked like just that old style of illustration. That was a lot of fun.
And honestly, that's the nature of the glasses, is that they've existed and they will continue to exist, and they just pop up in different eras. So whether it's the back of a teeny bopper magazine from the 40s or 50s, or the back of a Silver Age comic book, or if it comes up on the website formerly known as Twitter, in somebody's post, it's or like a pop-up ad. I could see that in the future, where these glasses come up and they're like on your social media. It's targeted advertising that it's just for one person. But that's the whole nature of it. And I think, Chris, you just took that idea and just took off with it. I loved it.
Well, I could picture.
That was
do you
fun.
remember on WandaVision, they did those fake advertisements in the actual show? They were
Yeah.
like these like play on like these obviously, but I would like I could picture that happening too. Like if this is like a television show or a movie, like all of a sudden you just at the end of the like before you go to commercial break ish, you just play this ad for these magic specs, but it's like a vintage looking ad, but it's really obviously fake and made for the movie and TV show. It'd be cool.
Yeah.
But I mean, and there's more even opportunities beyond just advertising, the glasses targeting you with advertising. Because I think their nature is that they are going to hit you in a place where you're the most vulnerable, so that you will automatically be attracted to them.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be the back of a comic book, or it could be sitting in a box on the side of the road when you get a flat tire, because that's what you need right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I don't want to spoil too much of the comic book at all, or because I want people to read the trade when it drops. But like, they find the creepiness of like, and also the part of like comic or the stuff that happens in comics. Sometimes you just have to write off and go, okay, that's the way it is. Is kind of how I took the beginning of how they got the actual specs. Like, you look at this ad and then you get them. And to me, but obviously that's part of the supernatural part of the whole story, not the fact that like you're trying to explain away comic book. Sometimes you just explain away, you say something, you're like, you just have to believe it because it's a comic book, let's move on. This was actually more of a supernatural aspect of it, but still I had that aspect of like, it's part of a comic book, so you just have to believe that this is the way it happens and you move on from it.
Well, I think, and I at least my intention behind the glasses showing up was the idea that the glasses had already like sunk its hands into Kenny and Ted the second that they opened their comic book. So they didn't have to do anything more. The specs were going to come to them. So rather than it being an unexplained type of thing, it's unexplained in the sense of it's eerie, not unexplained in the sense of there's a gap there. So, and it was very intentional on our part, was to leave that open and have them just show up. And of course, these two 17-year-old guys are like, they never once asked the question, why did these just show up at our doorstep? You know what I mean? Because they're teenagers.
Yes, we're just going to roll with it. This is fine.
Secret wishes. Who cares how we got them?
I also appreciate when you read a comic book. Obviously, this book came out in very similar timing to 8 Billion Genies, which also had wishes and things like that in it. Completely different comic book, like completely different comic book. But the idea that you two left this at a spot where it wasn't all about the wishes. Like it was, think about like that's what that comic book is all about. Is everybody's wishing. There's all these wishes going on. That your book is more. There's a few wishes that happen here and there. But the idea that the wishes you don't make are probably actually more impactful or crazy than the wishes that you do make. And that's what's so cool about this. This thing, you didn't go buck wild crazy. There isn't like this, I wish my school was bubblegum. It's like there's small wishes that make sense and move the story forward, but don't take away from the story.
I mean, it's not. I personally did not set out to tell a story about wishes. I set out to tell a story about Kenny and Ted, and the fact that that's the wish granting glasses is sort of the engine that tells that story. It's the framing of it. I think was really cool and really interesting, and it's such. To me, it's so poetic that it came out around the same time as 8 Billion Genies, because literally that's everybody gets a genie that grants you a wish. And so it's about 8 billion wishes. Yeah. And then ours is literally about one wish that they don't ever make. So I think it's just sometimes the universe syncs up, and it's wild to watch that.
It's great. It's crazy in that sense. But again, if anybody could, they're literally the only cross thread between the two of them is that they both people make wishes or don't. Wishes are talked about in both of the books. That's about the only connection between the two books. But it is what it is. And and the horror aspect of it, you mentioned that too. That's awesome. The artwork is perfect for it. I do believe you guys are a perfect team for this book. Roman Stevens' coloring is amazing too. The whole team over and I've always appreciated for years now the other creative team that's over at Boom and the people that actually help you make these books a success as well is a great thing over there too. I'm guessing you guys are both very ecstatic that it came out over at Boom.
Yeah, I think Boom is doing a lot of great stuff lately, and I'm honored that they gave our smaller, less epic thing a chance to breathe and exist among all of the big stuff that they're doing.
Yeah, and I think it's the tone of it fits really nicely with a lot of the things that they're doing. They came out around the same time, like Eat the Rich and Grimm and some of these other series that they're doing. So I think it definitely fits within the catalog. It's kind of the book that could. So anybody who's listening, if you give it a shot, go pre-order it right now. We're still, I think this will come out right.
Well, come out
Did
the
you
day
say
that
potentially?
it comes out probably the day that the actual the book is available, so you can just go to the store and get it. But
just buy it.
Just buy it. I would think that this is one of the benefits I've had, and I'm friends with my local comic book shop owner, Paul Eaton over at Galactic Comics, is that the fact that Boom, the name Boom to them now is very just like take a chance on a trade, even if he's not going to order in stock of 10 or 15 trades to put in his small shop in Bangor, Maine, it's like the name Boom just goes, you know what, this is going to sell, period. So let's just buy a couple and we'll put it on the shelf. We don't have a problem. Trades are doing very well now on the market and stuff like that. So it's one of those things, but like the benefit, a lot of times he uses me now because I talk to a lot of you people like ahead of time. And so like, it's so like, I was talking about this book when I was in previews with issue 1. And so now it's been in his mind. So he's like, oh yeah, I got to make sure I get a couple of specs to have on the shelf for people, and so
don't forget the absolutely killer cover by the one and only Chris. It's such an arresting cover that I just it'll pop off the shelf, and anybody who's familiar with Boom, I think, will give it a shot and enjoy it. I mean, it's a different type of story, but I think it's my personally best reviewed book I've ever been a part of, and it makes me really proud to say that because it was probably the one that I've just poured all my heart and soul into this book, and to have people connect with it and stop me and say, oh, specs, it's really wonderful. So I think folks will really enjoy it.
I was actually glad. I was looking something up. I don't know, did they change the date on it?
Could be the 22nd.
22nd is where it said bookstores, at least, but
23rd.
22nd. Yeah, I don't know where it's not showing it. The specs trade paperback on Previews World, which is not always right. It says September 30th.
That's not
September
correct.
20th. Lunar distribution. No, you're not with Lunar. It's with Previews World. That's weird. I don't know. But it's
September 20th is OA, which I don't know what that means, original art maybe. But if you scroll down, it does say August 16th is the release date of the trade.
Okay, so August 16th is it? This will drop on August 16th as well, I believe. But yes, the paperback has the wrong cover on Amazon too. But whatever, that's always the way it is.
Which cover?
It has the cover for issue 1.
Which is pretty cool. Skylar Patridge.
It's a great cover. All the covers have been great. All the artwork's been great. Yeah, they've been a beautiful, beautiful books. And
then, of course, my favorite. This is Chris's cover.
Yeah, that's the only cover I did for the single issues. I was too busy, and I was sad about it because I love doing covers, but I really loved Skylar's work on the covers, and I think that she and I do a lot of similar things, a lot of similar tastes. So I was really enjoying her covers, but I was really glad I was begging to do the trade paperback cover. I really wanted to do it, and I'm glad I was able to.
I'm looking forward to that too. And I'm one of the big things I've always had this. I'm an artist as well, and I am more of a graphic artist, but like I see a trade on the shelf and they picked a random issue from the series, like the 5-issue series, and they used that cover. And it's like if you put all 5 issues up on a wall and pick the worst cover out of all the 5 issues, that's the cover they usually use, which is weird. I like the idea of it being a unique in standalone cover for a trade. It takes, I do like the idea of having an issue 1, but I also like the idea of it having an additional thing for someone like myself who collects floppies and is very rarely buying a trade. Is that now makes me want that, you know what I mean? Like now I want that additional, now I have an additional cover.
Right.
That's the only place it exists.
Yes. So it's,
and
like,
it also makes that A cover, on the floppies, I sort of exist in that world too of collecting and it's quote unquote speculating, but it makes this A cover kind of unique, so that you want to go pick up the A cover if you have the trade and you really liked it, but you want this cool sort of They Live tribute cover to it, which is really fantastic. I think it actually boosts the popularity of this issue, which is completely sold out, just FYI.
Yeah.
If anybody's keeping track. Who's keeping track? Who's keeping score? I'm not.
No one's keeping score. The funny thing is, so I have my studio space here, my office space, up on the top. You can't see behind me, but there's a whole row. It goes across the whole thing. And they're all comic books that are signed by guests who have been on the podcast. And you were obviously, David, thank you for signing one and sending it back to me. But there's up there, it's by Specs #1. And so when I was like, oh, I want to throw a Specs comic book behind me, I'm like, I got to get up on a ladder to get it. So I'm like, I'll just put Specs.
Oh my God.
Or I'm not taking that down for the backdrop here, but
I do have my Specs #1 9.8 up. It's off screen, but it's up there on the top.
You got it
because I had to get that. Yeah, I actually bought it off the secondary market instead of sending my own. So I picked it up. I have so much faith in this story, belief that this story is going to find its way beyond even comics. Not right now because the strikes and everything is awful. But eventually I think it's going to find its way. And so I'm investing in our story.
Yeah. Now. I would love it. There's so many things that, like, ones that I'm happy, like this, both you two would obviously be happy to if this is what it lived and this is how it lived and so on and so forth. There's no more than this, but like, I always love the idea. This is one of those ones I could see going, like, I love the idea of it being a comic book and only a comic book, but I would absolutely love to see it be something else as well. So that would be amazing as well. But like, and I would love to see for other iterations. Like I mentioned, the glasses there's such a story behind these glasses, and there's so much more to these glasses that you could tell stories about individual people and different lifestyles and different, times in age and all that stuff. With these glasses being the, catapult,
the magnification on the I do have an idea for a sequel. I haven't even told Chris this, but set during the 1950s, and the main character is like a 20-something girl who just maybe is neurodiverse or something, but is committed to a mental hospital because people don't understand what the problem is. And she gets the glasses in there, and they wreak havoc. And the opening scene is her walking away from the asylum when it's engulfed in flames. And then we go back to see how it got to that point. She burns the place down. Or does she? Who knows?
Who knows?
Could be just a sunbeam through the lenses of those glasses. We don't know.
If we could put more skeletons in it, I want to do it.
Oh my God. It would be nothing but skeletons. Like every scene. Quiet, emotional scenes between skeletons. That's what it's going to be, Chris.
I'll draw all the skeletons.
And that's you just mentioned that too. It's like you could use this as a launching point to all these tell different stories about different people and different lifestyles, different things that are going on in people's life. And how this is a story of queer characters. Like, how important was it to have that as the backdrop for this, or the main part of the story?
I mean, it's the keystone for the whole story. This is the story of Kenny and Ted, and Kenny's, hasn't come out yet, and he's in love with his best friend, and Ted's struggling to fit into a town when he looks different from everybody else. That's the key to the story. So it would not exist if it wasn't a queer story. And and I don't know, it's so funny because I don't even think it's a queer story like plot line. It's about a pair of magic glasses, right? But it wouldn't exist if it wasn't a queer story, if that makes any sense whatsoever. It's not a coming out story. It's not a bullying story per se, even though there's a bully in it and stuff happens to the bully. But it's really, it wouldn't be what it is if it wasn't a queer story. And I think Chris, you probably agree with that.
Yeah, I don't know if I would have said yes to it. I mean, I might have because I wanted to work with you anyway, but I think that was the big sell for me is queer story, because I could tell spooky stories all day, but having queer representation in a way that is it's not the main thing of the story, but for me it is, and for queer people reading it, they might latch on to the queer element more so than the other stuff. But I feel like it's also not so filled with because it's not a coming out story and it's not any of that I think all people who are not queer can connect to the story and the characters. I think it just has that perfect balance, and without that it would just be just something that's not as special or important, I think.
The interns are getting rowdy back there, Chris.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, there's 5 dogs here right now.
Oh my God, I have 4 here.
And
I'm just trying not to move too suddenly because they're all going to go crazy. We got plenty.
I feel like it's funny too because I feel like a lot of non-queer people just think that queer stories are about coming out. Like there's this weird thought process that like if you're telling a queer story, it's because this person's coming out. But like some of these amazing stories over the past couple of years I've had, it's just like, okay, the character in the comic book is queer. Guess what? We have queer people all around us. Like all of us live in this. Like, just because I'm not doesn't mean that I can't read stories about that. And that's the biggest thing I think about this is that this is a book for everyone, but you also gave it to the ability of whether you look different or you feel different or anything like that, you can read this as well as someone who feels like they don't feel different than anybody else. Like it's everything this is a book for everybody, but it has this amazing part of comic books nowadays, which is it has, when Miles Morales was created, it was this whole thing. The whole big part of it was, and when the movies had Miles Morales, and it was like, oh my gosh, it's an entire different generation of people who now can see this is my Miles Morales, this is my Spider-Man, this is what this person looks like. And I feel like now we're getting this point even more in comic books, whereas, younger queer people who don't know how to navigate things or so on and so forth can read these books and feel like, oh, there's another person like me in this book. And I love that now. And I'm so happy for that.
Yeah. My favorite queer stories are ones where queer people just exist because that's the world. They're just there because they should be, and they always have been. But now we know we're not pretending that they're not there.
As much.
Exactly. I was in as much. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, people still are. So I don't want to just tell you that. I know you probably know that.
But I mean, those of us who have a brain.
Yes.
So I was on a panel at San Diego Comic-Con this year that was about when superheroes look like me. And one of the things they talked about is for so long, superheroes have sort of looked like a single sort of archetype. The same characteristics: white, cis, straight male. And one of the things we talked about is if you are a kid who doesn't share those characteristics and this is supposed to be your aspirational character, you feel like a failure because you will never be able to live up to that standard that society is telling you that's the standard, and you're never going to make it if you're Black or gay or a woman, or if you don't share those characteristics. So I like to see that changing. And then I've gotten this question multiple times. It really amuses me. Folks say, oh, is this specs must be based on your personal experience in high school, right? You must have been in love with your best friend in high school, right? I'm like, but
you should say no. The specs part is real. Like that was actually part of my high school. The
No,
other part of the
I had
story
wish granting glasses in high school. Are you kidding? No, but they asked me that, and it's so I just have to giggle a little bit because I tell them no, this isn't a story that has personally happened to me, but what I think it does is it shows how authentic feeling the story is. And and me being part of the queer community, Chris being part of the queer community, and telling this story gives it a level of authenticity that convinces people reading it that this must have, like, at least the emotional part must have happened to somebody telling the story because it feels so real. And so, and it's just me projecting what my experience has been into these characters in this situation and say, this is how I would have almost certainly would have approached this. This is how I would have felt. So again, it's about telling queer stories and just being authentic about the stories that we want to tell.
I like that word, authentic. It's perfect for this, honestly, because it's yeah. And we recently read Wind for our book club at the comic book store, and we felt the same way with James's work on that, and the same idea of like it's a story about Wind is queer, but like doesn't mean that it's about Wind being queer.
Yeah,
like it is what it is. It's
about
part
Wind.
of life. Yes,
I love that. I love all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I just watched
awesome.
Last night. I watched that movie Nimona on Netflix. It's a queer story like that where it's not about being queer, but it's filled with queerness, and it's I don't even know how to explain it. I think it's a perfect movie. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it.
It's based on a comic book.
It's based on a comic book, and it's a very non-binary experience, very queer. It's so good. So good.
Watch it. I'll have to watch it. I didn't know. Yeah, just Googled it, and I'm adding it to my thing here.
Noelle
be promoting
and
that.
I believe Nimona was Noelle's like major project when they were going to college for art. That then got set up with a major publisher that then got picked up by production company and then made the movie that is now on Netflix. So
yeah, and
it's such a wonderful backstory.
They also were like a showrunner for She-Ra.
Okay.
Noelle Stevenson. So I mean, it's good. The movie is so good. I need to read the comic. I haven't read it, but I want it. Want to get it.
But that right there, you mentioning that, Chris, is one of my favorite things recently about optioned or books that have become movies is the opposite side of that. It's the people who see the movie or TV show. And now, I mean, I was that way I was late to the comic book game as well for most people. I skipped out and didn't read Y the Last Man. And Y the Last Man was that one for me.
Don't say you were late. I used to say I was late to comics, and I tell this story all the time because it's not fair to you. It's not fair to you because it suggests there's some right time to come to comics, and if you've missed that boat, then somehow you're late to it. And I don't believe that at all. So you came later in life. You came later in life to comics.
That makes sense to me, but I guess my point would be what I should reiterate is the fact that because I'm coming quote unquote late to comics is that you miss a bunch of comics, and there's so much good comics now that it's like it's hard to catch up in that sense. So like going back and reading some comic books that you really should be reading as a comic book fan just because of the historical aspect of it or the importance of them is hard. And when I had Eliza Clark on, who was the showrunner for Y the Last Man on Hulu, and when we were talking about that at the very beginning, I read like the first couple of issues, and it forced me to, but like it made
you're so mean to yourself.
made me read the entire series. Even I put aside anything else that I was supposed to be reading at the time or wanted to read at the time, and just read that because I was like, okay, first of all, I really feel like I need to read this. The show's on TV, so on and so forth. And it's a very important comic book in my opinion. And so it was cool to see the TV show get me to read the comic book. And I think that's one of the cool things about things that are adapted into a bigger medium or a different medium, I should say, is the cool part about going back, going to the store and making sure that if something is coming out, like if this, Nimona is coming out on Netflix, that local comic book shops, if it is available, should be carrying these trades and these comics as possible, because of the fact that someone is going to walk through that door and say, do you have this? I mean, I was standing in the comic book store when some like some 12-year-old girl came in and asked the local comic book shop owner if she had She-Hulk in stock because the She-Hulk TV show. And, you know, Marvel's great at that, by the way. I'm shaking my head to people who are listening. Their trade game was very off at that point because there was not a single trade for She-Hulk on the market at the time that She-Hulk was on TV. And you know, but like I said, I love that opposite side of it. Like, it's great to have that speculation market we've talked about earlier about having something that potentially could come something more. But it's really cool to see the opposite and go back and get the trade because you saw a TV show or something on that. So I'm now going to read Nimona.
Can you imagine if at the end of Nimona on Netflix, there was a way that you could just click your remote and you could order a copy of the comic book from a local shop, not Amazon, but some indie bookstore that does like online or something, or order it from the publisher. Can you imagine at the end you could just click that and then they would bring, but you know, these corporate.
Well, Mark Miller's comic books would be the first ones, wouldn't they? Because Mark has that deal with Netflix as it is. So, like,
that's
even Mark's comic books in the stores now, when you open the page, it says a big Netflix logo on it. So that would be the first.
Yeah,
but they still don't integrate it.
No, they don't.
It needs to be better. I feel like that's where like manga and anime are doing better than Western comics.
Yes,
is they don't necessarily have an integration built in, but it's so built into culture that if you see an anime that you like, you know there's a manga already most of the time, and you can just go get it. And it's easy to know where to start. You start at 1 and you go. It's easy.
We don't have volume 27.
It's easy to start. It's not easy to continue.
Yeah, but it's harder. Like if you're like, oh, She-Hulk, so I'm gonna go find out what She-Hulk has.
Exactly.
And you don't even.
It's not there.
It's intimidating. There's nowhere to start.
No, there
isn't. If it's even on the shelf.
There's a current series that's actually pretty good, but yes, you're right about that. The anime part of it, I just haven't been able to get into anime as much, but that's just, I guess that's a personal. Again, there's finding time.
Yeah,
there's too much stuff to watch. There's too much stuff to read.
Oh yeah,
it's all that stuff. So you know, you two should feel honored that I took time to read Specs. No, I'm kidding. I don't.
Not only did you take the time to read it, but then you requested more material.
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
It's funny, and I was just so before I forget, I have in my notes here before we're gonna finish up here pretty soon, but like before I forget, I wanted to mention on like the second or third page of the book, they make a joke about Batman. And is this I am not a DC fan at all, so this made me extremely happy to read this Batman joke about covering half Batman's face, and I laughed so hard, and when I read it again, I was like, I wanted more Batman jokes in.
There's so much to talk about with that particular moment. It's in my brain forever and ever. I'm going to be 100 years old, and I'm still going to ask the question, why nobody recognizes Superman and Clark Kent. And I know there is a long, in-depth conversation to be had about persona and presentation and, you know, transformation and all those things which can justify that. But I wanted to take this moment in this book to poke a little fun at the idea that in 1939, 38, when Action Comics came out, a dude with glasses takes his glasses off and nobody knows who he is. So I just thought it was funny. and I hope that nobody hates me for that, but I just thought it was
this conversation. Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's because it's not only recognizing who the person is, but I used to have a co-host when I first launched the podcast a couple of years ago, and we had talked about doing an entire episode of just like how to kill superheroes, like the idea that like most of them, like if you just like, how come Joker hasn't just shot Batman in the face? Like, just shoot him in the chin and he's gonna die. You're just done. You're done. It's over. You don't need to worry about it anymore. And things like that. Like, it was just kind of funny. And then I read that and I was like, oh my God, that's so funny. I actually sent it to him. I sent a little picture. I took a picture to him. I sent it to him. I said, hey, you gotta read Specs now because of this one joke in here about Batman.
I mean, and it's just teenagers. And that's exactly the kind of thing that I think these teens would just talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And it's what we comic book fans had. Like I love when I walk into the comic book store on a Wednesday and people are having the most ridiculous conversation, like it's real life political talk or something like that about why Joker hasn't done this and all that stuff. And I'm like, this is like one of the very few places in the entire world where you're okay having this conversation here and people aren't going to make fun of you.
Yeah. Or who would win
We'll still
in a
make
fight.
fun of you.
Yes.
But it's all
yeah.
We'll still make fun of you. It's just a safer space. It's a safer space.
Yeah. Well, I did that once on accident. As I finished up here, I was like, this person at the pull list, I was helping the owner pull some comic books, and they literally pull anything that has to do with Spider-Man, but just like any connected to Spider-Man, they buy Spider-Man, Miles Morales, Spider-Man, whatever it is. And the 1 week, it was this weird, obscure Spider-Man, whatever it was. And I was just like, oh, who would pull this as they walk in the door? And I was like, oh, I gotta shut up about making fun of someone else's pull list. But I'm like, people aren't judging me for my pull list. I should not be judging someone else for their pull list. They like what they like, and that's fine. I'm gonna move on.
I would be, you would shred me because my pull list, I mean, I like my jam is like late 80s, early 90s, like TV and movie tie-in comics. So like the Care Bears that Marvel Star Comics did in the 80s and freaking Mad Balls and My Pet Monster and all that, those nonsense things. That's so I'd be pulling like My Little Pony from IDW or whatever.
Again, I'm done judging people for their pull. Someone probably judged me for pulling Specs. No, I'm kidding. But as we finish up here, you guys obviously both have other projects as well. So Specs is available on August 16th at your local comic book shop, August 22nd at bookstores everywhere. Be sure to let them know. Even if you're hearing this today and you go to your local comic book store and they don't have any, they can get it. So just tell them you want one. Don't just look at the store. Oh, it's sold out. Say it to the LCS owner that you want one because they'll be able to get one in. And it usually takes a week or two. So it's not like you're waiting a long period of time. Buy local if you can, but I also mention to people every single time they're on here, I'm like, but buy it. Like, if you can buy it, wherever you can buy it, like try to buy local, but if the only place you can buy it is online in a bigger store, still buy it because that shows Boom and all the other publishers out there that the book is worth investing more time and energy and money into. So buy it, period, but try buy it local if you can.
Yes.
Yeah, that's my little pitch there. But I was mentioning quickly to David before you got on here, Chris, that I work for a brewery and we're doing a collaboration beer with Daniel Kraus for his book coming up, Whalefall. And so part of this is Daniel's coming up here at the end of August to sign autographs in here in Maine and stuff like that for Whalefall. But I kind of like tricked him into coming to the LCS as well. And so he'll be signing some the Autumnals over there as well. We found a bunch, random issues in the back issues and stuff like that. So we're gonna pull those out as well. So that was pretty cool. I literally was like had like a brain fart and was like, I know that name. How do I know that name? And I was like, I read the book before, but it just didn't even faze me at the time. And I'm like, no wonder I really. David mentioned this. No wonder I really liked the book. Daniel's a great writer and you're a great artist. So
his first comic.
Mm-hmm. It's great. Everybody should read it. It's amazing. But yeah, that's pretty funny. I thought that was awesome little connection there. And obviously Killer Queens 2 is coming, right?
Killer Queens 2, baby. It's actually going to be out by the time this drops. It will have been a 1 week out on the market.
Nice.
And I should say the Eisner-nominated Killer Queens is returning with the sequel.
Congratulations, too, because Rain was nominated, too, right?
Yeah, so Rain and Killer Queens were both nominated this year.
Yeah.
And I definitely wore a pink crushed velvet tux to the Eisner Awards at San Diego Comic-Con because that's how you need to do these things.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
Saw the pictures.
It's awesome.
Looks good, right? My husband had on a cranberry crushed velvet, and we just had like these pocket squares, and I didn't take home any trophies, but man, I felt like such a winner in that jacket. I recommend it to anyone.
You took the only trophy you need, right?
My arm candy, my husband, my arm candy.
Yeah, arm candy. Yeah. You gonna yell at me if I think he looked better than you? Or is that okay?
Oh my God, this podcast is over.
And obviously you have more coming for Canto at some point. I mean, I guess there's this.
Yeah, so we are no longer with IDW, and we have announced that we have signed a new deal with a new publisher. We haven't announced the publisher yet, but we are renewed to finish the quote-unquote Shrouded Man saga. and potentially move on from there and get these beautiful new hardcover reprints of everything. So they'll be library ready, school ready, plus shelf ready for everyone who is a Canto fan or hasn't even read it yet. So Killer Queens and Canto are coming down the pike, and I'm currently writing. There's a one-shot for Dungeons and Dragons Saturday Morning Adventures with IDW that's coming out, and it's an issue that is one of my favorite that I've ever gotten the chance to work on. It's such a fun little story, full single story, single issue, one shot that's coming out in 1 week from when this podcast airs, I think, or 2 weeks.
So there
August.
you go. What else is coming down the pike for you, Chris, or currently?
The final issue of Nightfall Double Feature is coming, and I have an unannounced thing, and I don't even know if I could say with who yet. I don't really know if I could say anything at all. But
don't. Yes. I usually say don't say it. The other person on the podcast usually says say it. No, don't say it.
By the time this comes out, I might be able to say, but I still don't know. But I've already done. I'm done with the first issue and the cover and everything, so I'm sure they'll announce it soon-ish. I don't know. We'll see. Something's coming.
That's above our pay grade.
It's funny because I was on a podcast with Dan Panosian, and I was saying something about how, like, oh yeah, and you got Alice Never After coming at Boom. This is great. He goes, that's been announced. I'm like, yeah, like 2 days ago. I got it from a PR email from Boom Studio. Like, it's coming. Because I didn't know that. And he's like, I don't want to say anything. And he's like literally Googling it, make sure that he can say something about it. I'm like, yeah, I'm baiting you into saying something that you shouldn't be saying right now. No. But
I don't know. I think we all put an outsized importance on all of those things. So I don't think we ever get in trouble.
No. But
don't say anything, Chris.
I'm just trying to get you to admit it, Chris.
This is not us peer pressuring you over here at all. But so exactly. But yeah, so Specs is a great book out there for really fans of a bunch of different things. Horror, again, the queer aspect of it, the friendship, 80s.
Stephen King, Stranger Things,
Yeah.
Stand By Me,
all of those, Fear Street,
Goosebumps, Fear Street, all of those spooky coming of age, eerie kind of that kind of feel to it. If you're into any of those posters, things.
I drew a lot of movie posters in the background. 80s references,
Easter eggs, yes.
Yeah, I put in. There's the Back to the Future DeLorean is in there.
There's a Nintendo
Stephen King book, Nintendo VCR.
VCR, you giggle as I look at my entire VHS collection in front
of me. I started buying cassette tapes.
Oh, good for you.
This just came in today because I can't.
That's cool.
I don't know when the news is. I do artwork for the local comic conventions here. I do like their announcement posts and things like that, and there's a connection to that. That's all I'm gonna say. I'm probably gonna get my ass handed to me because of that. It's possible it could be announced between now and then too. I don't know, of this book, and a lot of times I like to, this movie. A lot of times I'd like to get those. That's what I get signed at conventions. Is usually via. If it's not on a VHS tape, I don't care. If it's on a VHS tape, that's what I have. So I have Extremely Goofy Movie because I met Goofy, right? Obviously, whatever. And then Wild Thornberries is signed by Danielle Harris, who was also in Halloween, and all these people getting horror things done. And I'm walking over there getting a Wild Thornberries clamshell VHS tape. She's like, you're literally the only person at this convention getting this done. I'm like, of course I am.
She was in Mean Girls too, right?
Yep. And then I got like Jim Winburn, who did stunts on Escape from New York, got Escape from New York VHS, Scream. All this, so it's cool. So like, I like to do that. I like to collect this.
They're cooler. So this VHS tapes look better on the shelf.
Yeah, they do.
They look like paperback novels.
I believe your book is also available if anybody wants to through Omnibus, the app, the new digital platform as well. Cool. So if you want to read it now, I believe you can at least get a couple issues on there. They were on at one point to talk about that too. So I'd love to give them a shout out. But otherwise, August 16th is the day that the trade drops. And if you're a local bookstore kind of person, August 22nd, the way the market works, that's how that works. Otherwise, I really appreciate you two both taking the time to come on here and chat your books and so on and so forth. You guys are both on social media, Instagram, X, whatever the hell you want to call it now.
It's Twitter.
Threads, Blue Sky.
Blue Sky.
Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram.
LiveJournal.
The app
MySpace.
formerly known as Twitter, MySpace, whatever. And actually Whatnot. I want to mention Whatnot.
Yes, Whatnot.
I stream a lot on Whatnot. And if you want to get any signed copies, I actually have a show on August 16th, the day that this drops, to offer up signed copies of the Specs trade paperback. So that's where we are.
Nice.
Awesome. I really appreciate both of you taking the time, and both of you guys both back on whenever you want to talk about whatever you're doing. And and check your email, David. But get back to me on that email we talked about off air here. Come on. Take your time. You didn't get sick at San Diego. That's all I'm glad about. I've seen too many sick San Diego Comic-Con people. It's too. And honestly, got me nervous. It was the weirdest thing. I live in Maine, like the farthest part away from San Diego as possible. And I looked at these pictures of people. I'm like, did I run into them recently? I'm like, I haven't run into any of these people recently except for digitally. So like, I'm okay.
Yeah. And of course I see all the posts and I'm like, well, I talked face to face with that person on Thursday night, and I saw this person on Saturday. But like a great scene from Mission Impossible with all the security lasers, I got through without tripping the alarm. So that's where we are.
But obviously people get sick and everything. I also selfishly was like, I hope you didn't get sick because I want you to be able to record. Not because I want you to be healthy or anything like that, but I was selfishly wanting you to be here. But
I know. I see you, Justin. I see you.
I really appreciate it. Again, thank you so much. Everybody out there, follow them all on social media so you can know those current things, but buy Specs. It is wonderful. And then buy anything else with the two of these people's names on it because they're all wonderful. So I appreciate you guys taking the time.
Thank you.